Garden of Remembrance, these were opened in 1966. And when we're going out to the front gate, you'll notice on the walls, it's written outside, the gardens are dedicated to all of those who've given their lives in the cause of Irish freedom. Now, some people are under the impression that it's simply a 1916 memorial. It's not. It's dedicated to all of those who've died, given their lives. And the reason for the confusion was that they were opened on the 50th anniversary of the rebellion. They were designed by an Irish architect called Daithí Hanley. And as you can see, it's in the form of a sunken cross. The sculpture up behind us there, that's by an Irish artist called Oisin Kelly, and it's based on the Irish mythical tale called The Children of Lear. Now that was actually moulded and sculpted in a foundry in Florence in Italy and then shipped back to Ireland where they put it in place. Now the writing up the back wall there, that's actually a poem, and that came about as a result of a national campaign held in 1972. They wanted something for the back wall which could best represent what the gardens actually mean, what they're all about. And they settled on this poem by an Irish poet called Liam MacHouston, and his poem called The Vision. Now the Vision is written in a particular style of writing. It's called Ashling poetry. Now Ashling is a very popular girl's name in Ireland, and Ashling means vision or visionary. Because in Ireland's very early history, it used to be against the law to refer to the Irish as a nation or as a people. The British had censorship laws and you couldn't write about stuff like that. So to get round this law, they developed this style of writing called ashling, where they would write about dreams or visions that they had. Now, it's very similar to some very old Irish stories. Really, when you read some of the really old Irish stories, there should be a health warning on them. Not to take them literally, because sometimes they have double meanings. Yeah. So for example, if you read about Kathleen O'Houlihan or My Dark Rose Lane, Roisin Dove, and you read about these women and you read about how their lovers charmed them and chased them and seduced them and then started to treat them really badly. And some people will say, well, no offence, but that's called a bad relationship. And the Irish don't have a monopoly on them, right? But then an Irish person will come along and tell you, there is no such woman as Kathleen O'Houlihan or Roisin Dove. These women represent Ireland, and their abusive lover is England. So when you're reading about the relationship of these people, you're actually being told the history of Ireland and England. Now, one of the most famous stories in that line would be a story called Gulliver's Travels, written by Jonathan Swift or Dean Swift. Now, when Gulliver's Travels was originally written, if the king had realised what it was actually about, Gulliver or Swift would have lost his head very swiftly, because it's not actually a children's story. It's one of the most politically inspired stories ever written. And I'll put it to you this way, the way I'd explain it is, if you can imagine Gulliver washing up on Lilliput, and all of these little Lilliputians come along and tie him down and tie him to the beach and overpower him. The political message was, it doesn't matter how big and powerful you think you are, whether you're a lord, a king, or even a giant, if all the little people stick together, they can overcome anyone. Now, obviously, Swift's, his religious bent, Dean Swift, you have Gulliver then leaving Lilliput, and he goes to the next island, where he's now small in a land of giants. And the religious message there is, there's always something more powerful than you. So this is where the style of writing comes from. Now it's written up there, Australia, in Irish, in French and in English, and it really does describe the gardens very, very well. Now the monument here, the water feature, if you notice there's a mosaic in the water there, and that's replicates these Irish Celtic weapons. Now if you look very closely at them, you're going to notice there's something wrong with the weapons. There's a flaw in them, and it's replicated throughout the water feature. All of the spears have been broken. Now that goes back to Ireland's very early Celtic past, when the Celts used to go into battle with each other, and now the Celts were all pagan. Now when the Celts used to go into battle with each other, when the battle was over, both sides used to get their weapons and break them and throw them into a body of water like a river, a lake or a stream. And this was like an act of cleansing. This was to signify that hostilities were over, that peace had been restored. So if you're standing up on either of the plinths and you look down, you're looking at all these broken weapons in a large body of water. It's like it says as you're coming into the gardens, this is a garden of remembrance. We're not celebrating battles or wars here, we're celebrating peace. Now another interesting thing is, another twist on that is, now you know that here we have this pagan symbolism inside a Christian monument. And that goes right back then to the introduction of Christianity into Ireland, that the Christians had an awful trouble getting these Celts away from their paganism. So what they actually done was they incorporated an awful lot of pagan festivals into Christian ones. So it's almost like the Celtic cross there, you've got the combination of both. Now the most important aspect of the gardens is not actually the water feature or the monument or the poem, it's actually the grounds themselves above here. That's the most important aspect. Because if you imagine, this used to be a level park, and those railings, the black ones here, they're the original railings. And when the 1916 rebellion had been suppressed, all of the men and women volunteers who took part were all rounded up and actually kept in here overnight. So you had all the British soldiers surrounding the park, and the prisoners were kept here, with a smaller group kept at the front of the hospital. The next morning then, the British G-men, as they were called, or the intelligence police, the political police, they came in here then under armed military guard and started to walk among all the Republican prisoners, looking at each one of them very closely, and then basically putting their hands on the leaders, identifying them and saying, right, come on with us. The leaders were taken from here then, and these were the ones who would later be executed. All of the volunteers then, these are the ones who'd all been rounded up and shipped off to England and spread among the various prisons all over England. But that's the most important aspect of the gardens here. Now what we can do now is, some of us are going to stroll down now into O'Connell Street to the GPO. For those of you who don't feel up to it, you